Train your mind before it's too late. Inner Steel, long-form script. Target, 8000 words. Cold open. You wake up one day and realize you've been living someone else's life. Not because someone forced you. Not because the world cheated you. But because somewhere along the way, you stopped training the one thing that controls everything, your mind. And by the time most men figure that out, it's already late. Not too late. But late enough that years have slipped through their fingers like sand, years spent reacting instead of deciding, drifting instead of moving, surviving instead of becoming. This is not a video about motivation. Motivation is a wave. It rises, it crashes, it leaves you right where you started. This is a video about something older, something more permanent. This is about the discipline of the mind, the kind men like Marcus Aurelius called the only true wealth, the kind Epictetus said no master, no chain, no circumstance could ever take from you. You are going to learn how to train it. 9 principles. 9 stories. And by the time this video ends, you will understand something most men never do, that the battle was never out there. It has always been in here. If this channel speaks to something inside you, subscribe to Inner Steel. We're building something here, not for the weak moment, but for the man you're becoming. Let's begin. Point 1. The mind is a muscle. And most men have never trained it. In the winter of 168 AD, a Roman emperor sat in a military tent on the banks of the Danube. Outside, barbarian armies pressed against the empire's edges. Disease moved through the camps. Men died faster than they could be replaced. Inside that tent, Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journal, not orders to his generals, not letters to Rome, but notes to himself. Reminders. Corrections. Mental training committed to parchment. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He didn't write that because he felt powerful. He wrote it because he was fighting the most important war of his reign, not against the Marcomanni, but against the noise inside his own skull. The fear, the doubt, the grief, the exhaustion. Every night, he trained his mind the way his soldiers trained their bodies. Most men never make this connection. They understand that to build a strong body, you must subject it to resistance. You must lift weight that is slightly beyond what you can currently handle, recover, and return. They understand that musicians practice scales for hours a day. That surgeons rehearse procedures thousands of times before touching a living body. That every elite performer in any field has one thing in common: deliberate, daily, difficult practice. And then they wake up each morning and let their mind do whatever it wants. They scroll before thinking. They react before reflecting. They consume before creating. They allow whatever emotion rises first to set the tone for the entire day. And they wonder, years later, decades later, why they feel so powerless over their own life. Here is the truth they were never told. Your mind is a muscle. If you don't train it, it trains you. If you don't direct it, it follows the path of least resistance, which in the modern world means anxiety, distraction, comparison, and a slow, quiet despair that you can't quite name but cannot quite escape. Marcus Aurelius trained his every single day. Not because it was natural to him. Not because he found it easy. He trained it because he understood what was at stake. And so must you. The men who change their lives don't find better circumstances. They develop better minds. And developing a better mind starts with a single decision: to stop leaving it untended. Subscribe to Inner Steel if this is the kind of clarity you've been missing. What we do here isn't noise. It's training. Point 2. Control what you give your attention to, or lose control of everything else. In the 1st century AD, a man named Epictetus was born into slavery. He had no property, no rights, no autonomy over his body. His master once twisted his leg, slowly, deliberately, and Epictetus said calmly, "You're going to break it." The master continued. The leg broke. Epictetus looked at him and said, "Did I not tell you?" No rage. No panic. No collapse. What Epictetus understood, what he built his entire philosophy around, was a single idea so powerful that Roman emperors would study his writings for centuries after his death. You do not control what happens to you. You only control what you give your attention to. He called it the dichotomy of control. And it is the first principle of mind training. Everything in your life falls into one of two categories. What is up to you, your thoughts, your judgments, your responses, your effort, your character. And what is not up to you, other people's opinions, outcomes you can't guarantee, events you didn't cause, the past. The untrained mind treats both categories as equally urgent. It worries about what people think, obsesses over outcomes it cannot control, replays conversations from 3 years ago, and spends enormous amounts of energy, every single day, trying to influence things that will never bend to its will. The trained mind draws a line. Not because it doesn't care. Not because it is cold or detached. But because it knows that every ounce of attention given to what you cannot control is an ounce taken from what you can. Here is the practical discipline. Every morning, before you touch your phone, before the world gets its hands on you, ask yourself one question. What is actually within my control today? Write it down if you have to. Then give your full attention to that list, and release, not suppress, but genuinely release, the rest. This is not passive. This is the most aggressive mental act a man can perform in the modern age. Because the modern age is specifically designed to hijack your attention, to make you care about things that don't serve you, to flood your mind with noise until you forget what signal even sounds like. Epictetus did it in chains. You can do it with a free life and a notebook. Train your attention like you train your body. With intention. With repetition. With the knowledge that where your attention goes, your life follows. Point 3. Silence the inner critic before it silences you. In 1940, a young Viennese psychiatrist named Viktor Frankl was building one of the most promising careers in European medicine. He had developed a new school of psychotherapy. He was known across academic circles. He had a manuscript, years of work, ready for publication. Then the Nazis came. He was stripped of his title, his practice, his home. His manuscript was confiscated. His family was taken. He was sent to Auschwitz. What happened to Frankl in those camps is almost beyond comprehension. But what is extraordinary, what is the reason his name is still spoken today, is what he did inside his own mind during those years. In the barracks, during forced marches, during roll calls that lasted for hours in freezing cold, Frankl began to reconstruct his stolen manuscript from memory. Word by word. Argument by argument. He wrote on tiny scraps of stolen paper. He rehearsed ideas in his head during the night. While his body was imprisoned, his mind was at work. He also noticed something about the men around him. The ones who survived, not always physically, but spiritually, psychologically, were not always the strongest or the youngest. They were the ones who had found a way to silence the voice that said, "This is the end. You are nothing. There is no point." The inner critic is the most dangerous prisoner in the world. Because it lives inside you. And it uses your own voice. Every man carries this voice. It speaks in moments of failure and reminds you of every other time you failed. It speaks in moments of ambition and tells you who do you think you are. It speaks in moments of grief and tells you you'll never recover. It tells you you're too old, too late, too broken, too ordinary. And here is what Viktor Frankl understood that most men never do. You cannot silence that voice by fighting it. You cannot argue it into submission. You cannot wish it away. You can only replace it with something larger. Frankl replaced it with meaning. With the manuscript he was rebuilding. With the face of his wife. With the idea of the book he would write when he walked out of those gates. He gave his mind something to build instead of something to escape. When the critic rises in your mind, and it will, your job is not to fight it. Your job is to redirect it. To give your mind a mission so clear, so compelling, that the critic's voice becomes background noise in a life moving forward. Your mind will talk to you every day. The only question is whether you're the one deciding what it says. Point 4. Stop feeding thoughts you don't want to grow. There is an old Cherokee teaching, you may have heard it before, but not like this. A grandfather is sitting with his grandson by the fire. He says, inside every man, two wolves are fighting. One is made of fear, resentment, bitterness, regret, self-pity. The other is made of courage, clarity, discipline, gratitude, purpose. Every day they fight. The boy looks up and asks, which one wins? The grandfather says, the one you feed. This teaching is older than psychology, but modern neuroscience has confirmed exactly what it describes. Your brain is a prediction machine. Every thought you think regularly becomes a pattern, a neural pathway that grows stronger with use and weaker without it. When you rehearse anxious thoughts, you train your brain to find threats. When you rehearse resentful thoughts, you train it to find enemies. When you rehearse helpless thoughts, you train it to find reasons to give up. And when you rehearse disciplined thoughts, when you regularly ask yourself what is within my power, when you regularly choose effort over comfort, when you regularly direct your mind toward what you're building rather than what you've lost, you train it to find possibility even in difficulty. This is not wishful thinking. This is neuroplasticity, the brain's proven capacity to rewire itself based on what you practice. Here is what the untrained mind does with this information: nothing. Because it feels abstract. Because rewiring takes time and the mind always wants immediate results. Here is what the trained mind does: it chooses, deliberately and repeatedly, which wolf to feed. Not once. Not in a moment of inspiration. Daily. In the small moments. The irritation you choose not to nurse, the grievance you choose not to replay, the fear you acknowledge and then release, the gratitude you force yourself to locate even on the difficult days. A man named James Stockdale spent 7 years as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. He was tortured more than 20 times. And he said afterward that the men who didn't survive, emotionally, psychologically, were the optimists. Not because hope is wrong, but because blind optimism is a form of passive thinking. We'll be home by Christmas, they'd say. Christmas came and went. They broke. The men who survived were the ones who accepted the brutal reality, and still chose to keep feeding the right wolf. Courage. Discipline. Purpose. Presence. Not because it felt good. Because they understood what was at stake. Your mind grows in the direction you feed it. This is not a metaphor. This is the most concrete and actionable fact about human psychology ever discovered. Feed deliberately. Point 5. Build a morning that builds you. In 1786, a Scottish poet published a collection of verses that would make him famous across Europe. His name was Robert Burns, and in one of his most celebrated poems, he wrote about a tiny field mouse whose carefully built winter nest he just accidentally destroyed with his plow. He watched the creature scramble in the cold and wrote, "The best laid plans of mice and men go often askew." He was talking about the fragility of plans. But he was also, without knowing it, describing the modern morning. Most men wake up each day with something like a plan, intentions at least. And then the phone appears. The notifications. The news. The algorithm. The 1,000 tiny interruptions that turn a morning into something that happened to you rather than something you directed. By 9 a.m., your mind has already been colonized. The Stoics understood mornings as sacred. Seneca wrote letters early in the morning, before the demands of Roman public life began. Marcus Aurelius used his mornings for philosophical reflection, for mentally rehearsing the day ahead, for grounding himself in what mattered before the empire's noise began. They understood something that modern research now confirms. The first hour of your day has disproportionate influence over your mental state for the hours that follow. You are most suggestible in the morning. Most open. Most impressionable. Which means if you hand that hour to chaos, chaos sets your tone. The trained mind builds a morning ritual not because rituals are comfortable, though they become so, but because rituals are architecture. They build the structure inside which a disciplined mind can operate. Your ritual doesn't have to be elaborate. It doesn't require a cold plunge and a 4-hour meditation. What it requires is intention. Waking before the world demands you. Owning the first minutes. Moving your body. Entering your thoughts before someone else's thoughts enter you. One concrete practice. Before you look at any screen in the morning, write down 3 things: one thing you're grateful for, one thing you intend to do today, and one thing you will not allow to affect your peace. Not as a spiritual exercise, as mental training, as the act of a man deciding what kind of mind he will carry into his day. The morning is where the mind is made. Build it, or be built by whatever shows up first. Inner steel exists for men who want to build deliberately. Subscribe and make this part of your daily architecture. Point 6. Learn to sit with discomfort without running from it. In 1914, Ernest Shackleton's ship, the Endurance, was trapped in Antarctic sea ice. The ice moved slowly at first, then it crushed the ship entirely. 27 men found themselves stranded on floating ice, hundreds of miles from any human being, in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. They were there for 497 days. What Shackleton did, what he had to do, every single day, was manage his own mind first, so he could lead the minds of his men. He could not show despair, because despair was contagious. He could not show panic, because panic kills judgment. He could not run from the discomfort, because there was nowhere to run. He had to sit with it, carry it, and keep moving. Every man reading this will face moments, not on Antarctic ice, but in his own life, where the discomfort is overwhelming. The failed business, the broken marriage, the career that collapsed, the health that changed, the door that closed, the version of yourself that isn't what you planned. The untrained mind does one of 2 things with discomfort. It runs into distraction, substances, screens, anger, avoidance, whatever numbs the feeling. Or it drowns, letting the discomfort become the entire story, until depression builds walls and the man stops moving altogether. The trained mind does something different. It learns to sit with discomfort without catastrophizing. To feel the weight without pretending the weight isn't there. To say, this is hard. And also, I will not be destroyed by this. This is not toughness in the Hollywood sense, jaw clenched, no emotion, just grind. Real mental toughness is the capacity to be fully present with something painful and still make a clear, purposeful decision. That is harder than any physical feat. The practice is exposure. Deliberately putting yourself in slightly uncomfortable situations, cold water, difficult conversations, hard physical effort, long stretches of silence, doing the thing you've been avoiding, not to punish yourself, but to teach your nervous system that discomfort is not death. Every time you sit with something hard and don't run, you expand. Every time you run, you contract. Shackleton's men all survived. Every one of them. Not because the ice wasn't real, but because their leader had trained himself to sit with the unbearable, and teach others to do the same. Point 7. Guard your mind from the people who poison it. In the 3rd century BC, a philosopher in Athens named Zeno of Citium began teaching in a place called the Stoipoikal, the painted porch. From his name and that place, Stoicism took its name. And one of the first things Zeno taught his students was this: show me who you spend your time with, and I will show you what you are becoming. He didn't mean this as social commentary. He meant it as neuroscience, before neuroscience existed. Because the men Zeno was watching had lived long enough to see the pattern. That a man surrounded by bitter people becomes bitter. A man surrounded by small thinkers becomes small. A man surrounded by chaos carries chaos into every room he enters. The mind is porous. It absorbs its environment. Now extend this principle beyond people. Your mental environment includes not just the people in your physical life, but the voices you listen to, the content you consume, the conversations you allow, the social media feeds you scroll, the news cycles you invite into your mornings. All of it is input. All of it shapes what your mind does when it's left alone. Most men have never audited their mental diet. They know what they're eating physically, at least roughly. They know what their body is being exposed to. But they have given almost no thought to what their mind is being fed, and by whom, and toward what end. Here is the audit you must perform. Who in your life, after you spend time with them, leaves you feeling smaller? More anxious? More resentful? More hopeless? Not because they are evil, people are rarely evil, but because the frequency they operate on is one your mind cannot afford to absorb. What content, after you consume it, leaves you more reactive? More outraged? More distracted? More hollow? Guarding your mind is not arrogance. It is stewardship. The most important thing you own is your mental clarity. You would not let someone fill your lungs with smoke every day and call it harmless. Do not let them fill your mind with noise and call it connection. The trained mind is selective. It chooses its inputs the way a serious athlete chooses food, with the understanding that what goes in determines what comes out. Protect your mental environment. With the same ferocity you would protect anything else that matters to your life. Point 8. Replace reaction with response. The gap is where your power lives. Viktor Frankl, who we met earlier in this video, wrote one sentence in his book Man's Search for Meaning that has been quoted more than perhaps any other sentence in modern psychology. Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. He wrote that after Auschwitz. After everything had been taken. After he had watched men die not only physically but spiritually, losing themselves in the camps long before their bodies gave out. And what he identified as the difference was this: the men who retained their humanity, who refused to become what the camps tried to make them, had found a way to preserve that space between what happened to them and how they responded. That space is everything. The untrained mind has no space. It reacts. Someone says something, you fire back. Something goes wrong, you spiral. An obstacle appears, you freeze or explode. The distance between what happens and what you do is zero. You are, in that state, not a man with a mind, you are a mechanism. Press the button, get the reaction. Every time. The trained mind expands that space. Not through emotional suppression, that is a trap, and it leads to the kind of damage that comes out sideways, later, in ways that destroy relationships and health and careers. But through practice. Through the deliberate cultivation of a pause. The pause sounds simple. It is not easy. It must be trained like a muscle. Here is how you begin. In every moment of rising emotion, irritation, fear, shame, anger, there is a physical sensation before the mental story begins. A tightening in the chest. A heat in the face. A constriction in the throat. Learn to recognize that physical signal as a trigger, not to react but to pause. In that pause, breathe. One slow breath. Long enough to interrupt the automatic response. Long enough to ask, what would the man I want to be do right now? This is not weakness. The man who explodes at every provocation is not powerful. He is predictable. He is controllable. Anyone who knows his buttons can control him like a puppet. The man who has trained the pause is the man who cannot be manipulated. Because he chooses his responses. Every time. Marcus Aurelius called this the discipline of action, the practice of choosing what you do with your energy rather than letting it choose for you. Frankl called it freedom. Epictetus called it the only power no one can take. Train the pause. It is the smallest thing. It will change everything. Point 9. You are always building something. Make sure you know what it is. In 1519, a Spanish conquistador named Hernán Cortés landed on the shores of Mexico with 600 men and a mission that most of them believed was suicide. When they arrived and saw the scale of what they were facing, the Aztec Empire, tens of thousands of warriors, an entire world they didn't understand, the mood among his men turned dark. Desertion was not only possible. It was likely. Cortés made a decision that became legendary. He burned the ships. Not destroyed, burned. Publicly. So every man watched the only way home turn to ash on the water. There was one direction after that. Forward. Now, this is not a story about aggression or conquest. The history of Cortés is complicated and brutal, and that history matters. But the psychological principle embedded in that decision is one the Stoics understood and built their lives around. Commitment is a mental act before it is a physical one. And until you have made the mental commitment, until you have, in some private and permanent way, burn the ships. Part of your mind will always be planning the retreat. Most men spend their lives in ambiguity. They want to build something, a body, a business, a life, a character, but they keep one foot near the exit. They don't fully commit because full commitment means full accountability. And full accountability means that if it doesn't work, there's no excuse left. So they stay half in. And half in men build half-built lives. Here is the question this principle demands you answer, not once, but regularly, as a form of mental maintenance. What are you building? Not what are you avoiding? Not what are you enduring? Not what are you waiting for? What are you, right now, with the time and energy and focus you have available, actively constructing? Because here is what is always true, whether you know it or not, you are always building something. The question is only whether it is what you actually want. The man who drifts is building a life of drift. The man who reacts is building a reactive mind. The man who consumes without creating is building a habit of passivity that will calcify over years into something he won't recognize when he finally looks up. And the man who trains his mind, who applies these 9 principles, imperfectly, daily, with full commitment, is building something that will outlast every circumstance he will ever face. Burn the ships in your mind. Not dramatically. Not in some grand gesture. But quietly in the private space where your real decisions are made. Decide what you are building. And build it with the one tool you have always had and never been taught to use. Your mind. Closing. We have covered 9 principles today. Let me give them back to you, in the form they deserve, not as a list, but as a single truth with 9 faces. Your mind is trainable. This is the most important and most ignored fact of human existence. Train your attention, because where it goes, your life follows. Train your inner voice, because it will either build you or destroy you, and the choice is yours. Train your morning, because the day that is not started with intention is a day that happens to you. Train your tolerance for discomfort, because growth lives on the other side of what you're currently willing to feel. Train your environment, because the mind is porous, and what surrounds you enters you. Train your pause, because in that space between stimulus and response, your freedom lives. And train your commitment, because half-in men build half-built lives. Marcus Aurelius was one of the most powerful men in human history, and he spent his nights writing notes to himself about how to be better. Not because he was weak. Because he understood that power without a trained mind is a ship without a rudder, impressive to look at, and going nowhere useful. Epictetus was a slave who produced some of the most liberating philosophy ever written, because he understood that the only cell that truly confines a man is the one inside his own skull. Viktor Frankl walked out of Auschwitz and immediately began writing about meaning and freedom, because even in the worst circumstances human history has ever produced, he had trained his mind to find the one thing that could not be taken. These men were not superhuman. They were men who took the training seriously. And so can you. Start today. Not with a grand plan. With one choice. One pause. One morning claimed before the noise begins. One thought fed deliberately instead of by default. One ship burned in the privacy of your own mind. The battle has always been here. And now you know how to fight it. If this video gave you something real, subscribe to Inner Steel. What we build here isn't content for the scroll. It's training for the life you actually want to live. And we're just getting started. Train your mind. Before it's too late. End of script. Approximate word count, 8,000 words. 9 story anchored points. Marcus Aurelius / Epictetus / Viktor Frankl / Cherokee Teachings / Robert Burns + Stockdale / Shackleton / Zeno of Citium / Viktor Frankl, Gap Principle / Hernan Cortez. Note: verify historical details before publishing. Dates, quotes, and events should be fact-checked independently.